In 1970, 3 astronauts aboard Apollo 13 were over 200,000 miles from Earth when an oxygen tank exploded. And in that instant, everything changed. Power was failing, oxygen was running out, and even more, there was nothing they could do to fix it. Their only hope was someone outside of their situation. Back in Houston, engineers worked nonstop, guiding them step by step and doing what the astronauts could not do themselves, and somehow they made it back. But there was a moment during re-entry when everything went silent. No communication, no signal. No one even knew if they had survived. And I wonder if you've ever been in a moment like that, where something in your life or someone you love was completely out of your control, where no amount of effort from you, no amount of planning or strength could fix the situation. That place where you actually reached the point where there was nothing left that you could do. Have you ever been there before? Because in the Gospel of Luke, in chapter 7, the passage we're going through today, we see 2 people in that exact situation. One who knows he needs Jesus, and one who doesn't even realize help is coming. And in both cases, Jesus steps in. So let's find out what happens when faith actually meets the authority of Jesus Christ. Turn with me, if you would, to Luke chapter 7, verse 1. When he had completed all his discourse in the hearing of the people, he went to Capernaum. And a centurion's slave, who was highly regarded by him, was sick and about to die. Now we have to remember what's happening. Remember last week we talked about Jesus had just finished one of the most significant teachings, the Sermon on the Mount, or as Luke calls it really, the Sermon on the Plain. And we learned what a life looks like lived under the authority of the king. And what Luke is doing here in the gospel is he's still painting a picture of this is who Jesus is. Because remember, people were still trying to figure out, who is this guy? In many ways, Jesus had made Capernaum his home base for ministry. Now, a Roman centurion was a man of significant authority. He commanded about 100 soldiers within a legion of thousands. And he wasn't just powerful, he was wealthy. An ordinary soldier earned a few hundred denarii a year. A centurion could earn several thousand, making him far more financially secure than most people. So this centurion had power. This centurion had social influence. This centurion had a lot of wealth. And this centurion had authority. But this centurion had a problem. And he could do nothing about this problem. He had a slave who was near death. Now Luke stresses here in this passage that the life of his servant, the life of his slave, was literally hanging by a thread. He was going to die. And we're not told why, but this slave was highly regarded by the centurion. He may have thought that this slave brought invaluable value to him. He may have thought this slave was just an incredible human being and he was near death and he didn't want to lose his slave, or both. Either way, the centurion goes to extraordinary lengths to save the life of this slave. Verse 3, when he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come and save the life of his slave. And when they came to Jesus, they earnestly implored him, saying, "He is worthy for you to grant this to him, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built us our synagogue." Now listen, some of you have read your Bibles before. To understand the impact of this, you got to go there, Okay, sometimes we get so familiar with things, we just read over them and we don't understand the impact. Imagine if you are this centurion or you are this slave or even some of the other people in this narrative. The centurion had heard about Jesus' ministry. Now remember, we've covered in Luke, news about Jesus was what? Spreading. He'd heard about his miraculous power, and he knows that he's a Gentile. And he understands how delicate Jewish and Gentile interactions can be, due mainly to ritual purification issues. So what does he do? He asks some Jewish elders who were men of influence in the local synagogue to go on his behalf and ask Jesus to help him. Now Luke is showing us something here that we can't miss. And that is that Jews and Gentiles can actually get along. And they actually can have respect for one another. This is actually a theme that runs through Luke and also in Acts. They come to Jesus on behalf of the centurion and they ask him to heal the life of his slave. And the Greek word for save here actually means to bring someone safely through. It means to cure. It means to save. Now, what's remarkable about this is that the centurion, who is a Gentile, actually believes that Jesus has the power to save the life of his slave. And what do we find that happens? These Jewish leaders actually advocate on behalf of the centurion. They're like, he loves our nation, Jesus. He has great respect for our people. He respects our worship, and he actually helped us build our synagogue. And that most likely means that he gave of his wealth to help the synagogue be built. Here he is giving out of his own personal money to help the synagogue be built. And what do they say? Jesus, he is worthy for you to grant him this request. This is fascinating. Jews now advocating on behalf of Gentiles. Here was a very socially significant individual who was a Gentile who had power, sending Jewish leaders to ask Jesus to heal his slave. Verse 6. Now Jesus started on his way with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason, I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. Now Luke doesn't say much other than Jesus started on his way with these Jewish leaders back to the house. Now Luke wants us to understand something. Jesus' compassion has no racial limits. One of the themes in Luke is that Jesus came for all. Everybody say all. All people. And Jesus is on the way to the centurion's house, but he never makes it there. As he gets close to the centurion's house, the centurion actually sends a second delegation to meet Jesus. And through these messengers, he says this, Lord. Now, I just want to stop there. How does he address Jesus? Lord. Now, this may not be a full confession of Jesus as the Messiah or a declaration of his saving faith of the centurion, but it is certainly an understanding on behalf of the centurion that God's power is at work through Jesus. It is a term of deep respect and recognition of authority, and that is significant because it's coming from a man who himself understood authority. And what does he say to Jesus? Do not trouble yourself any further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. Now, what had the Jewish elders, the Jewish leaders, what had they just said to Jesus? He is worthy. They had just said, Jesus, he is worthy for you to do this to him. And now we find the centurion saying, I'm not worthy. I talk about humility. In fact, Jesus, that's why I didn't even come to you in the first place. Not only is the centurion demonstrating incredible humility, but he's demonstrating incredible faith. He says to Jesus, just say the word. Just say the word. He recognizes what? That Jesus has access to God. And all Jesus has to do is speak and his slave will be healed. This is remarkable. Just, hey, don't trouble yourself. I know that God's power is at work through you. Just speak, and my servant will be healed. The centurion recognizes Jesus' authority and power. He himself is under authority, but is also in charge of his own forces. This is what the centurion is communicating. So how is the centurion seeing Jesus here? The centurion sees Jesus as ministering for God with his own sphere of authority. And just as soldiers and servants obey the centurion, these forces afflicting the centurion's slave will obey Jesus. The forces of sickness or whatever's causing the slave to almost be dead, the centurion is saying, they will listen to you, Jesus. Just say the word. Now, when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him. And he turned and said to the crowd that was following him, I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith. And when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. Jesus is, the Greek word is thaumazo, okay? Sounds impressive, but here's what it means. It means to marvel. It means to wonder. It means to stand in amazement. You know, the emphasis here really isn't on the miracle that Jesus did. It's on the faith of this centurion. And you only find Jesus marveling twice in the Gospels, and this is one of those occasions. His amazement actually causes Jesus to stop and address the crowd. And what Jesus is saying is this: I haven't seen faith like this in Israel. Learn from this. That's what he's telling the crowd. I want you to learn from this man. It's a faith that recognizes Jesus' authority and the power of his word. Not just over illness, though, but over distance. Jesus doesn't even have to be there. That's how powerful Jesus is. Jesus was physically absent, but still had the power to heal him from a distance. Now, I just want you to think about what's happening here. Here is a soldier from one of the most powerful armies in the world who realizes he's powerless in this moment, but there's one who isn't powerless. And by faith, he trusts in the authority of Jesus to do what he cannot do. And when the second delegation returned home, they found the slave in good health. Now, what was it that really mattered to Jesus here? It wasn't this man's status. It wasn't this man's position. It wasn't this man's wealth, or even the fact that he was a Gentile. What mattered to Jesus was his faith. But Luke doesn't stop there, because the next scene actually shows us something just as powerful but completely different. This time, as we will see, there's no delegation, there's no request, and there's no expression of faith at all. All there is an incredibly broken situation and a grieving mom. And I'm going to read it and then talk about it. Soon afterwards, he went to a city called Nain, and his disciples were going along with him, accompanied by a large crowd. Now, as he approached the gate of the city, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a sizable crowd from the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he felt compassion for her and said to her, "Do not weep." And he came up and he touched the coffin. And the bearers came to a halt, and he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." The dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. Fear gripped them all, and they began glorifying God, saying, "A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people." This report concerning him went out all over Judea and all the surrounding district. So soon after Jesus had healed the centurion's slave, he travels to a town called Nain, which was a small village in Lower Galilee, likely home to only a few hundred people. So this was a small town. Wasn't far from Nazareth. And as he approaches the town's gate, a place where public life passed in and out, two crowds collide. There was a large crowd that was following Jesus, and this crowd was actually filled with hope and anticipation. But there's another large crowd that was leaving the city gate as Jesus and the crowd that was following him was coming in. And this crowd is carrying a funeral procession, and guess what's going on with them? Grief. There's a finality that is causing deep mourning amongst this crowd. And at the center of that procession was a widow burying her only son. Now, burial back then usually happened the same day as death. So her son had just died. Now, some of you have had to say goodbye to kids. And there's a deep pain that goes along with a parent having to say goodbye to their kid. And that's where this mom was. She was a widowed parent. And in that culture, this was more than personal loss. It was also social and economic disaster, because without a husband or a son, she would have no primary means of provision or protection, and it would leave her vulnerable to poverty and dependence on others. So she's not only grieving her son, she's facing a future of isolation and uncertainty. And this whole crowd, again, you have to go there. This whole crowd is mourning. This whole crowd is weeping. This whole crowd is deeply grieving. And I want you to notice what Luke says. He says in verse 13, when the Lord saw her, and that is significant. This is the Lord. This is the one with authority. And what does he do? He sees her. I just want to suggest to you all here this morning that some of you need to be reminded that he sees you. He sees you. He knows. And when he sees her, what happens? What does the text say? When he sees this woman, he's moved. Emotionally, Jesus is moved. This word is a feeling word. He's moved with deep gut-level compassion. The word compassion in the Greek means to feel great affection for, a heart overflowing. It means gut-level love. It means their pain in your heart. And that is what Jesus was feeling in this moment. No one is asking Jesus for help here. No one is reaching out to Jesus in faith. In the previous scene, a man came to Jesus, but here, what happens? Jesus comes to the need. And he tells her, think about this. Think about how crazy of a statement this had to be. Do not weep. What? Do not weep. Now, he doesn't tell her this to dismiss her pain. He's telling her this because he's about ready to do something. And then he does something unthinkable. He actually touches the bear or coffin, which was an open wooden stretcher carrying the body, wrapped in burial cloths, which would normally make someone ceremonially unclean. To touch this would make a Jew ceremonially unclean. But guess what? Instead of death spreading to Jesus, life flows from Jesus. And with authority, he commands this young man to do what? I say to you, arise. And immediately, the text says, he gives two signs of life. He sits up and he speaks. And then what does Jesus do? It must have warmed his heart to give this young man back to his mom. See, she not only got her son back, she got her dignity back. She got her security back, and she got her future back in many ways. And what happened? Now remember, there's two great crowds that are watching this. Fear and awe sweep through the crowd as they begin to grasp what had just happened, and they declare, a great prophet has risen among us. Now, for the Jews that were there, they must have recalled Elisha and Elijah, but guess what they had to do? They actually laid on a person for them to come to life. All that Jesus did is what? Say the word. See, they have not yet fully realized that actually one greater than the prophets stands before them. And news about Jesus is spreading throughout the region, revealing that Jesus does not only respond to those who come to him in faith. This is a big deal. Jesus also moves toward the broken in compassion. He demonstrates not only authority over sickness, but even over death itself. Glory, hallelujah. So what? I wonder what it was like for those who witnessed both events. You know, someday in heaven, we'll get to hear a lot of stories. And what will the stories be like for those who followed in the crowd that day, who witnessed the power of Jesus' authority in responding to the centurion's faith and also witnessed this widow's son being raised? I wonder if those were trajectory-changing moments in their own lives, not just of witnessing miraculous power, but in understanding who Jesus really is. And it leads me to a couple questions here this morning. The first one is this: do I trust Jesus enough to bring what I cannot control to him? Do I trust Jesus enough to bring what I cannot control to him? Do I believe in his power and authority? I want to suggest to you that like this centurion, you can cry out to Jesus because of his authority and power. We work overtime to try to control a lot of things in our lives. Would you agree with that? But if you live long enough, I got news for you. No matter how hard you try to control things, there's going to be things that happen in your life that are completely out of your control. And in those moments, those are where the rubber meets the road moments in life. We have a choice in those moments to trust or to live in fear. You know, Jesus can take a messy situation and turn it into a miracle. Jesus can take what you think is terrible and actually use it for good in your own life and in the lives of others, even in situations you don't understand. That's another thing. If you live long enough, you will have things that happen in your life that you will not understand and be able to explain this side of heaven. It's happened in my own life, and as a pastor, I see it happen in other people's lives all the time. And when I try to make sense of certain situations, it doesn't make sense from an earthly perspective. That's why I love what it says in Proverbs 3. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. You know why I love that verse? Because sometimes I don't understand. And I don't have to. All I have to know is that He understands. You know, there's been times, even this last week, there was a moment in my life where I just stopped. I was in the middle of a situation and a circumstance that I didn't understand at all. In fact, multiples. and all in those moments, all that I could say is, Lord, here I am. I have no idea what you're doing, and this is completely out of my hands. I offer myself to you. I offer this circumstance to you. I trust you with this situation and ask you to work in and through me to accomplish whatever you want. I will trust you with the outcome. And in those moments, friends, you know what it really comes down to is what Luke's trying to encourage us with, and that is, this is who Jesus is. What do you believe about him? The second question for us to wrestle through today is, do I believe that Jesus sees me even when I haven't even asked for help? Some of you are stuck today because you're in the middle of something and it hurts so bad that you think that God's forgotten you. And your circumstances have got your mind in a place where you think God isn't good, there is no hope. And He wants to remind you today through His Word that He sees you. He sees you. He's compassionate. Do you believe that Jesus sees you and has compassion on you? Even when you don't even know what you need, Jesus is there demonstrating compassion over you. He sees you and He knows your needs. Jesus knows your needs. He knows my needs and your needs better than I know my needs. And I want to remind you here of something this morning, something that I have to remind myself of often. Jesus' priority is not my comfort. Jesus is not in heaven saying, hey, Matt, you're one of my sons, and my goal for you is to make you as comfortable on this earth as possible. What his priority is for me and for you is to form himself in me and in you. And unfortunately, being comfortable usually doesn't cause that to happen. And here's what happens depending on how we answer this question, you see. Luke is driving home. Remember, Luke is trying to teach us something here. And I really, especially you young people, I want you to hear this, okay? Hope is powerful. But unfortunately, so is despair and hopelessness. And what I want you to hear this morning is what Luke is trying to drive home in the gospel, and we're going to see it again. With Jesus, there's always hope. Regardless of your circumstance, regardless of what you're going through, with him, there's always hope. Chuck Swindoll says this about hope. Hope consists of two elements: a longing for something and the anticipation of fulfillment. Hope fuels people's fire. Despair is the antithesis of hope. Without hope, despair drowns in difficulties, all too often pulling its victim under with it. When we fall into the natural pattern of doubt, thinking things like, God doesn't love me, God doesn't care, the circumstances of life will substantiate our worst fears. Did you hear that? I love those words. Your circumstances, if you allow them, will substantiate the fears that are in your mind. Consequently, choosing to accept the truth of God's genuine care and active involvement becomes a discipline. When we choose to trust in his love, we will see it abound. This is why Paul says, take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. I love how Swindoll says this. Choosing to accept the truth of God's genuine care and active involvement becomes a discipline. And we've heard Dr. Ekman say, decide beforehand. Before the situation comes, how you're going to respond. And when we choose to trust in his love, we see it abound. You have choices in these moments. In these moments when you can't see a way out, and would you agree with me here this morning in these two stories? These are terrible things. We're talking about life and death. We're talking about trajectory-changing moments in a mom's life. Not just in losing her son, but socially and economically and leaving her vulnerable. I mean, just totally, radically changing. In all these moments, in the moments that you face, in the moments that I face, we have a choice of what we're going to really believe in our minds. What do we really believe about Jesus? And what Luke wants us to know is, he sees you. He's compassionate. There is actually gut-level love that Jesus has towards you. As long as you have Jesus, you have hope. And when you fix your eyes on him, you have hope, because our hope is not in our circumstances. Please remember that, friends. You need to write that down. You need to remember that. Our hope is not in our circumstances. Our hope is not in our finances. Our hope is not in whatever position we have at our work, in our country, or in your neighborhood, or on your team, or in your school. Our hope is in a person, and his name is Jesus, and he truly is a Savior worth following.